The Hound of the Baskervilles. Chapter 7. The Stapletons of Merripit House. The fresh beauty of the following morning did much to dispel the somber mood that had settled over us upon our arrival at Baskerville Hall. As Sir Henry and I sat down to breakfast, sunlight streamed through the high, mullioned windows, casting patches of color from the coats of arms adorning them. The dark paneling glowed like bronze in the golden rays, making it hard to believe this was the same room that had felt so gloomy the night before. "I suppose it's us, not the house, that we have to blame," the baronet declared, his voice light. "We were tired from our journey and chilled by our drive, so we saw the place in a negative light. Now we're fresh and rested, and it's all cheerful once more." "Yet there was more to it than just our imagination," I countered, a question forming in my mind. "Did you, by any chance, hear someone, a woman, I believe, sobbing in the night?" "That's curious, because I did think I heard something like that while I was half asleep. I waited for a while, but there was nothing more, so I assumed it was just a dream," Sir Henry replied, his brow furrowed in thought. "I heard it clearly, and I'm certain it was a woman's sob," I insisted, my conviction growing. "We must inquire about this right away." He rang the bell and asked Barrymore if he could explain what we had heard. It seemed to me that the butler's pallid features turned a shade paler still as he listened to his master's question. "There are only 2 women in the house, Sir Henry," he answered, his voice measured. "One is the scullery maid, who sleeps in the other wing. The other is my wife, and I can assure you that the sound could not have come from her." And yet he lied as he said it, for it happened that after breakfast I encountered Mrs. Barrymore in the long corridor, bathed in sunlight. She was a large, impassive woman with heavy features and a stern expression, but her eyes, betraying her, were red and glanced at me from behind swollen lids. It was she, then, who wept in the night, and if she did so, her husband must know it. Yet he had taken the obvious risk of discovery in declaring that it wasn't so. Why had he done this? And why did she weep so bitterly? An atmosphere of mystery and gloom was already gathering around this pale-faced, handsome, black-bearded man. He had been the first to discover Sir Charles's body, and we had only his word for all the circumstances surrounding the old man's death. Could it be that Barrymore was the man we had seen in the cab in Regent Street? The beard could have been the same. The cabman had described a somewhat shorter man, but that impression might easily have been wrong. How could I settle this question once and for all? The first thing to do was to visit the Grimpen postmaster and confirm whether the test telegram had indeed been delivered to Barrymore himself. Whatever the answer, I would have something to report to Sherlock Holmes. Sir Henry had numerous papers to examine after breakfast, making this a perfect time for my excursion. It was a pleasant 4-mile walk along the edge of the moor, leading me finally to a small grey hamlet, where 2 larger buildings, the inn and Dr. Mortimer's house, stood prominently above the rest. The postmaster, who also ran the village grocery, clearly remembered the telegram. "Certainly, sir," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. "I had the telegram delivered to Mr. Barrymore exactly as instructed." "Who delivered it?" "My boy here. James, you delivered that telegram to Mr. Barrymore at the hall last week, didn't you?" "Yes, father, I delivered it." "Into his own hands?" I inquired, pressing for detail. "Well, he was up in the loft at the time, so I couldn't put it into his own hands, but I gave it to Mrs. Barrymore, and she promised to deliver it at once." "Did you see Mr. Barrymore?" "No, sir. I tell you he was in the loft." "If you didn't see him, how do you know he was in the loft?" "Well, surely his own wife knows where he is," the postmaster retorted, his voice laced with irritation. "Didn't he get the telegram? If there's a mistake, it's for Mr. Barrymore himself to complain." It seemed hopeless to continue the inquiry, but it was clear that despite Holmes's ruse, we had no proof that Barrymore hadn't been in London the whole time. What if it were true? What if the same man was the last to see Sir Charles alive, and the first to follow the new heir upon his return to England? What then? Was he working for someone else, or was he pursuing a sinister scheme of his own? What interest could he possibly have in persecuting the Baskerville family? I thought of the strange warning clipped from the leading article of the Times. Was that his work? Or was it possibly the doing of someone who was trying to thwart his plans? The only conceivable motive was the one Sir Henry had suggested. If the family could be scared away, the Barrymores would secure a comfortable and permanent home. But surely such an explanation was too simplistic to account for the deep and subtle scheming that seemed to be ensnaring the young baronet. Holmes himself had said that no more complex case had come to him in his long and sensational career. As I walked back along the gray, lonely road, I prayed that my friend might soon be freed from his preoccupations and able to come down to take this heavy burden of responsibility from my shoulders. Suddenly, my thoughts were interrupted by the sound of running footsteps behind me and a voice calling my name. I turned, expecting to see Dr. Mortimer, but to my surprise, it was a stranger who was pursuing me. He was a small, slender, clean-shaven, prim-faced man with flaxen hair, a lean jaw, and an age somewhere between 30 and 40. He was dressed in a gray suit and wore a straw hat. A tin box for botanical specimens hung over his shoulder, and he carried a green butterfly net in one hand. "You will, I'm sure, excuse my presumption, Dr. Watson," he said, as he came panting up to me. "Here on the moor, we're a homely folk, and don't wait for formal introductions. You might have heard my name from our mutual friend, Mortimer. I'm Stapleton, of Merripit House." "Your net and box would have told me as much," I replied, "for I knew that Mr. Stapleton was a naturalist. But how did you know me?" "I was visiting Mortimer, and he pointed you out to me from his surgery window as you passed. Since our road lay the same way, I thought I'd catch up and introduce myself. I trust Sir Henry is doing well after his journey." "He's very well, thank you." We were all rather worried that after the sad death of Sir Charles, the new baronet might refuse to live here. It's a lot to ask of a wealthy man to come down and isolate himself in a place like this, but I don't need to tell you that it means a great deal to the countryside. Sir Henry has, I assume, no superstitious fears about the matter. "I don't think that's likely. Of course, you know the legend of the fiend dog that haunts the family?" "I've heard it. It's extraordinary how gullible the peasants are around here. Any number of them are ready to swear they've seen such a creature on the moor," he said with a smile, though his eyes seemed to suggest he took the matter more seriously. The story took a great hold on Sir Charles's imagination, and I have no doubt it led to his tragic end. But how? His nerves were so frayed that the appearance of any dog might have had a fatal effect on his weak heart. I imagine he really did see something like that on that last night in the yew alley. I feared some disaster might occur, for I was very fond of the old man, and I knew his heart was weak. "How did you know that?" "My friend Mortimer told me." "So you think some dog pursued Sir Charles, and that he died of fright as a result? Do you have a better explanation?" "I haven't come to any conclusion." "Has Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" The words took my breath away for a moment, but a glance at my companion's placid face and steadfast eyes showed that no surprise was intended. "It's useless for us to pretend we don't know you, Dr. Watson," he said. "The records of your detective have reached us here, and you couldn't celebrate him without being known yourself. When Mortimer told me your name, he couldn't deny your identity. If you're here, then it follows that Mr. Sherlock Holmes is taking an interest in the matter, and I'm naturally curious to know what view he might take." "I'm afraid I can't answer that question. May I ask if he's going to honor us with a visit himself?" "He can't leave town at present. He has other cases that demand his attention." "What a pity. He might shed some light on what's so dark to us. But as for your own researches, if there's any way I can be of service to you, please don't hesitate to command me. If I had any indication of the nature of your suspicions or how you intend to investigate the case, I might even now give you some aid or advice. I assure you I'm simply here on a visit to my friend, Sir Henry, and I need no help of any kind." "Excellent," Stapleton said. "You're perfectly right to be cautious and discreet. I'm justly reproved for what I feel was an unwarranted intrusion, and I promise you I won't mention it again." We had reached a point where a narrow grassy path branched off from the road and wound its way across the moor. On our right lay a steep, boulder-strewn hill that had once been a granite quarry. The side facing us formed a dark cliff with ferns and brambles growing in its crevices. Over a distant rise, a plume of gray smoke drifted. "A moderate walk along this moor path will bring us to Merripit House," he said. "Perhaps you'll spare an hour so I can introduce you to my sister." My first thought was that I should be by Sir Henry's side, but then I remembered the pile of papers and bills littering his study table. It was certain I couldn't help with those, and Holmes had specifically said that I should study the neighbors on the moor. I accepted Stapleton's invitation, and we turned together down the path. "It's a wonderful place, the moor," he said, looking around at the undulating downs, long green rollers with crests of jagged granite foaming up into fantastical surges. "You never tire of the moor. You can't imagine the wonderful secrets it holds. It's so vast, so barren, and so mysterious." "You know it well, then?" "I've only been here 2 years. The locals would call me a newcomer. We arrived shortly after Sir Charles settled, but my tastes led me to explore every part of the surrounding countryside, and I should think that there are few men who know it better than I do." "Is it hard to know?" "Very hard. You see, for example, this great plain to the north here, with the peculiar hills rising out of it. Do you observe anything remarkable about that?" "It would be a rare place for a gallop." "You would naturally think so, and that thought has cost several their lives before now. You notice those bright green spots scattered thickly over it?" "Yes, they seem more fertile than the rest." Stapleton laughed. "That's the great Grimpen Mire," he said. "A false step there means death to man or beast. Only yesterday, I saw one of the moor ponies wander into it. He never came out. I saw his head for quite a long time craning out of the bog hole, but it sucked him down at last. Even in dry seasons it's dangerous to cross it, but after these autumn rains, it's a dreadful place. And yet, I can find my way to its very heart and return alive. By George, there's another one of those miserable ponies." Something brown was rolling and tossing amidst the green sedges. Then a long, agonizing, writhing neck shot upward, and a dreadful cry echoed across the moor. It chilled me to the bone, but my companion's nerves seemed stronger than mine. "It's gone," he said. "The mire has him. 2 in 2 days, and many more perhaps, for they get in the way of going there in dry weather, and never know the difference until the mire has them in its clutches. It's a bad place, the great Grimpen Mire." "And you say you can penetrate it?" "Yes, there are 1 or 2 paths that a very active man can take. I've found them out." "But why would you want to go into such a horrible place?" "Well, you see the hills beyond? They're really islands cut off on all sides by the impassable mire, which has crept around them over the years. That's where the rare plants and the butterflies are, if you have the wit to reach them. I'll try my luck someday." He looked at me with a surprised face. "For God's sake, put such an idea out of your mind," he said. "Your blood would be on my head. I assure you, there would not be the slightest chance of you coming back alive. It's only by remembering certain complex landmarks that I'm able to do it." "Halloa!" I cried. "What is that?" A long, low moan, indescribably sad, swept across the moor. It filled the whole air, and yet it was impossible to say where it came from. From a dull murmur, it swelled into a deep roar, and then sank back into a melancholy, throbbing murmur once more. Stapleton looked at me with a curious expression in his face. "Queer place, the moor," he said. "But what is it?" "The peasants say it's the Hound of the Baskervilles calling for its prey. I've heard it once or twice before, but never quite so loud." I looked around, a chill of fear gripping my heart, at the vast undulating plain mottled with green patches of rushes. Nothing stirred over the expanse save a pair of ravens, which croaked loudly from a tor behind us. "You're an educated man. You don't believe such nonsense as that? I said. What do you think is the cause of such a strange sound? Bogs make queer noises sometimes. It's the mud settling or the water rising or something. No, that was a living voice. Well, perhaps it was. Did you ever hear a bittern booming? No, I never did. It's a very rare bird, practically extinct, in England now, but all things are possible on the moor. Yes, I wouldn't be surprised to learn that what we've heard is the cry of the last of the bitterns. It's the weirdest, strangest thing I've ever heard in my life. Yes, it's rather an uncanny place altogether. Look at the hillside yonder. What do you make of those? The whole steep slope was covered with gray circular rings of stone, a score of them at least. What are they? Sheep pens? No, they're the homes of our worthy ancestors. Prehistoric man lived thickly on the moor, and as no one in particular has lived there since, we find all his little arrangements exactly as he left them. These are his wigwams with the roofs off. You can even see his hearth and his couch if you have the curiosity to go inside. But it is quite a town. When was it inhabited? Neolithic man, no date. What did he do? He grazed his cattle on these slopes, and he learned to dig for tin when the bronze sword began to supersede the stone axe. Look at the great trench in the opposite hill. That's his mark. Yes, you'll find some very singular points about the moor, Dr. Watson. Oh, excuse me. An instant. It's surely Cyclopides. A small fly or moth had fluttered across our path, and in an instant, Stapleton was rushing with extraordinary energy and speed in pursuit of it. To my dismay, the creature flew straight for the great mire, and my acquaintance never paused for an instant, bounding from tuft to tuft behind it, his green net waving in the air. His gray clothes and jerky, zigzag, irregular progress made him not unlike some huge moth himself. I was standing watching his pursuit with a mixture of admiration for his extraordinary activity and fear lest he should lose his footing in the treacherous mire, when I heard the sound of steps, and, turning round, found a woman near me on the path. She had come from the direction where the plume of smoke indicated the position of Merripit House, but the dip of the moor had hidden her until she was quite close. I could not doubt that this was the Miss Stapleton of whom I had been told, since ladies of any sort must be few upon the moor, and I remembered that I had heard someone describe her as being a beauty. The woman who approached me was certainly that, and of a most uncommon type. There could not have been a greater contrast between brother and sister, for Stapleton was neutral-tinted, with light hair and gray eyes, while she was darker than any brunette whom I have seen in England. Slim, elegant, and tall, she had a proud, finely cut face, so regular that it might have seemed impassive were it not for the sensitive mouth and the beautiful, dark, eager eyes. With her perfect figure and elegant dress, she was, indeed, a strange apparition upon a lonely moorland path. Her eyes were on her brother as I turned, and then she quickened her pace towards me. I had raised my hat and was about to make some explanatory remark when her own words turned all my thoughts into a new channel. "Go back!" she said. "Go straight back to London instantly." I could only stare at her in stupid surprise. Her eyes blazed at me, and she tapped the ground impatiently with her foot. "Why should I go back?" I asked, bewildered. "I cannot explain," she said in a low, eager voice, with a curious lisp in her utterance. "But for God's sake do what I ask you. Go back, and never set foot upon the moor again." "But I have only just come." Man, she cried. "Can you not tell when a warning is for your own good? Go back to London. Start tonight. Get away from this place at all costs. Hush, my brother is coming." Not a word of what I have said. "Would you mind getting that orchid for me among the mare's tails yonder? We are very rich in orchids on the moor, though. Of course, you are rather late to see the beauties of the place." Stapleton had abandoned the chase and came back to us breathing hard and flushed with his exertions. "Halloa, Beryl," he said, and it seemed to me that the tone of his greeting was not altogether cordial. "Well, Jack, you are very hot." "Yes, I was chasing a cyclopades. He is very rare and seldom found in the late autumn. What a pity that I should have missed him." He spoke unconcernedly, but his small light eyes glanced incessantly from the girl to me. "You have introduced yourselves, I can see." "Yes. I was telling Sir Henry that it was rather late for him to see the true beauties of the moor." "Why? Who do you think this is?" "I imagine that it must be Sir Henry Baskerville." "No, no," said I, "only a humble commoner, but his friend. My name is Dr. Watson." A flush of vexation passed over her expressive face. "We have been talking at cross purposes," said she. "Why, you hadn't very much time for talk," her brother remarked, with the same questioning eyes. "I talked as if Dr. Watson were a resident instead of being merely a visitor," said she. "It cannot much matter to him whether it is early or late for the orchids. But you will come on, will you not, and see Merripit House?" A short walk brought us to it, a bleak moorland house, once the farm of some grazier in the old prosperous days, but now put into repair and turned into a modern dwelling. An orchard surrounded it, but the trees, as is usual upon the moor, were stunted and nipped, and the effect of the whole place was mean and melancholy. We were admitted by a strange, wizened, rusty-coated old manservant, who seemed in keeping with the house. Inside, however, there were large rooms, furnished with an elegance in which I seemed to recognize the taste of the lady. As I looked from their windows at the interminable granite-flecked moor rolling unbroken to the farthest horizon, I could not but marvel at what could have brought this highly educated man and this beautiful woman to live in such a place. "Queer spot to choose, is it not?" said he, as if in answer to my thought. "And yet we manage to make ourselves fairly happy, do we not, Beryl?" "Quite happy," said she, but there was no ring of conviction in her words. "I had a school," said Stapleton. "It was in the North Country. The work to a man of my temperament was mechanical and uninteresting, but the privilege of living with youth, of helping to mold those young minds, and of impressing them with one's own character and ideals was very dear to me. However, the fates were against us. A serious epidemic broke out in the school, and 3 of the boys died. It never recovered from the blow, and much of my capital was irretrievably swallowed up. And yet, if it were not for the loss of the charming companionship of the boys, I could rejoice over my own misfortune, for, with my strong tastes for botany and zoology, I find an unlimited field of work here, and my sister is as devoted to nature as I am. All this, Dr. Watson, has been brought upon your head by your expression as you surveyed the moor out of our window. It certainly did cross my mind that it might be a little dull, less for you perhaps than for your sister." "No, no, I am never dull," said she quickly. "We have books, we have our studies, and we have interesting neighbors. Dr. Mortimer is a most learned man in his own line. Poor Sir Charles was also an admirable companion. We knew him well, and miss him more than I can tell. Do you think that I should intrude if I were to call this afternoon and make the acquaintance of Sir Henry?" "I am sure that he would be delighted." "Then perhaps you would mention that I propose to do so. We may, in our humble way, do something to make things more easy for him until he becomes accustomed to his new surroundings. Will you come upstairs, Dr. Watson, and inspect my collection of Lepidoptera? I think it is the most complete one in the southwest of England. By the time that you have looked through them, lunch will be almost ready." But I was eager to get back to my charge. The melancholy of the moor, the death of the unfortunate pony, the weird sound which had been associated with the grim legend of the Baskervilles, all these things tinged my thoughts with sadness. Then, on the top of these more or less vague impressions, there had come the definite and distinct warning of Miss Stapleton, delivered with such intense earnestness that I could not doubt that some grave and deep reason lay behind it. I resisted all pressure to stay for lunch, and I set off at once upon my return journey, taking the grass-grown path by which we had come. It seems, however, that there must have been some short cut for those who knew it, For before I had reached the road, I was astounded to see Miss Stapleton sitting upon a rock by the side of the track. Her face was beautifully flushed with her exertions, and she held her hand to her side. "I have run all the way in order to cut you off, Dr. Watson," said she. "I had not even time to put on my hat. I must not stop, or my brother may miss me. I wanted to say to you how sorry I am about the stupid mistake I made in thinking that you were Sir Henry. Please forget the words I said, which have no application whatever to you." "But I can't forget them, Miss Stapleton," said I. "I am Sir Henry's friend, and his welfare is a very close concern of mine. Tell me why it was that you were so eager that Sir Henry should return to London." "A woman's whim, Dr. Watson. When you know me better, you will understand that I cannot always give reasons for what I say or do." No, I remember the thrill in your voice. I remember the look in your eyes. Please, be frank with me, Miss Stapleton, for ever since I have been here, I have been conscious of shadows all round me. Life has become like that great Grimpen mire, with little green patches everywhere into which one may sink, and with no guide to point the track. Tell me then what it was that you meant, and I will promise to convey your warning to Sir Henry." An expression of irresolution passed for an instant over her face, but her eyes had hardened again when she answered me. "You make too much of it, Dr. Watson," said she. "My brother and I were very much shocked by the death of Sir Charles. We knew him very intimately, for his favorite walk was over the moor to our house. He was deeply impressed with the curse which hung over the family, and when this tragedy came, I naturally felt that there must be some grounds for the fears which he had expressed. I was distressed, therefore, when another member of the family came down to live here, and I felt that he should be warned of the danger which he will run. That was all which I intended to convey." "But what is the danger?" "You know the story of the Hound? I do not believe in such nonsense. But I do. If you have any influence with Sir Henry, take him away from a place which has always been fatal to his family. The world is wide. Why should he wish to live at the place of danger? Because it is the place of danger. That is Sir Henry's nature. I fear that, unless you can give me some more definite information than this, it would be impossible to get him to move. I cannot say anything definite, for I do not know anything definite. I would ask you one more question, Miss Stapleton. If you meant no more than this, when you first spoke to me, why should you not wish your brother to overhear what you said? There is nothing to which he or anyone else could object. My brother is very anxious to have the hall inhabited, for he thinks it is for the good of the poor folk upon the moor. He would be very angry if he knew that I have said anything which might induce Sir Henry to go away. But I have done my duty now, and I will say no more. I must go back, or he will miss me, and suspect that I have seen you. Goodbye." She turned and had disappeared in a few minutes among the scattered boulders, while I, with my soul full of vague fears, pursued my way to Baskerville Hall. The end. If you liked the story, hit that like button and subscribe for more videos. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Was there anything that surprised you? Who's your favorite character in the story? I can't wait to hear your thoughts.